She removed each unused plate from the Christmas table, 7 settings perfectly arranged for guests who would never arrive. 72 years old, abandoned by her children, and now facing eviction from her home of 40 years. The certified letter made it official. They had 90 days to leave. That night, she found her husband studying a property listing no one else would touch, a collapsed cabin in remote mountains that realtors couldn't even give away. Their children called it elderly madness. The locals gave them 1 month to fail. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of resilience against all odds speak to your heart, consider subscribing for more journeys of extraordinary human spirit. Abigail Whitaker's hands trembled slightly as she positioned the 7th china plate on the embroidered tablecloth. The delicate floral pattern of the dinnerware matched the careful stitching she had completed decades ago. Roses and forget-me-nots intertwined along the fabric's border. She stepped back, surveying the Christmas breakfast table with critical eyes, adjusting a fork to ensure it was perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, its familiar melody echoing through the immaculate suburban home. Abigail had been awake since 5, preparing the traditional family breakfast, cinnamon rolls rising near the oven, egg casserole ready to bake, fresh fruit arranged in crystal bowls. The scent of coffee already filled the kitchen, the good coffee she saved for special occasions. From the doorway, Winston Whitaker watched his wife's meticulous preparations in silence. His tall frame, still straight despite his 75 years, cast a long shadow across the dining room floor. The morning light caught the silver of his hair, once dark brown, like the mahogany furniture he had crafted for their home. His eyes, kind but increasingly weary, took in the familiar ritual with a mixture of tenderness and resignation. "The rolls need another 30 minutes to rise properly," Abigail announced, not turning around. She knew he was there. After 53 years of marriage, they had developed the quiet awareness of long-partnered souls. "The children always like them best when they're fresh from the oven." Winston nodded, though Abigail couldn't see the gesture. He didn't voice what they both knew, that the rolls would likely go uneaten, the carefully set table unused. Instead, he said, "The house looks beautiful, Abby. You've outdone yourself this year." She had indeed. The modest but well-maintained home gleamed with 5 decades of collected Christmas memories. Hand-blown glass ornaments brought back from their travels adorned the 8-foot spruce in the living room. A nativity scene carved by Winston occupied the mantelpiece, surrounded by the Christmas cards they had received, fewer each year, as friends passed on or moved to be near their own. Children. Garlands wrapped the staircase banister, and wreaths hung from each window, visible from the street. What made the decorations most poignant were the touches of family history throughout. Ornaments made by small hands now grown, stockings embroidered with names, Thackeray, Juniper, Phaedra, and those of the 7 grandchildren. Each decoration held a story, a memory of Christmases when the house had rung with laughter and the chaos of family. "Should we call them?" Winston asked gently. "Just to check if their plans changed?" Abigail's shoulders stiffened. If their plans had changed, they would have called us. She adjusted a napkin that didn't need adjusting. Thackeray said they were spending the holiday at Elaine's parents' this year. Juniper is in Aspen with Garrett and the girls, and Phaedra has that important project deadline. Winston didn't point out that Thackeray's in-laws lived less than an hour away, or that Juniper's ski trip was optional, or that Phaedra's company shut down operations between Christmas and New Year's, like most tech firms. These were facts they both knew and had discussed in the quiet darkness of their bedroom over recent weeks. By 9 o'clock, the cinnamon rolls had been baked, their aroma filling the house with false promise. By 10, the casserole had been cooked and covered to keep warm. By 11, Winston had turned on the Christmas music that no one else would hear. By noon, the food had been returned to the refrigerator, untouched. The phone did not ring. At 1 o'clock, the mail carrier delivered the day's small bundle, mostly advertisements and charitable solicitations. Among them was a large envelope containing Thackeray's annual Christmas card. Abigail opened it carefully, revealing a studio portrait of their eldest son with his wife and 3 children, all wearing coordinating outfits in seasonal burgundy and gold. The card was pre-printed with "Warmest holiday wishes from the Whitaker family," signed with a generic "Love, the Whitakers" in gold foil. Not even Thackeray's handwriting. "They look well," Winston commented, studying the faces of grandchildren growing up faster than their visiting schedule allowed him to witness. Cameron's nearly as tall as his father now. He turned 14 in September, Abigail replied. We sent that model airplane kit you made. They never mentioned if he liked it. By 3 in the afternoon, Abigail began the process of clearing the table she had so carefully set. Winston moved to help, but she shook her head firmly. I'll do it. One by one, she removed the unused plates, the untouched silverware, the napkins never unfolded. Each item was returned to its proper place: china to cabinet, silver to drawer, tablecloth to linen closet, with the same care she had shown in arranging them. The ritual complete, she settled beside Winston on the living room sofa, where he had been pretending to read a book while actually watching her through concerned eyes. They sat in the companionable silence of long marriage, Christmas music still playing softly from the speakers Winston had installed decades ago, when such systems were still a novelty. It's been a year since the argument, Abigail finally said. I thought surely by Christmas they would have, if not forgiven us, at least been willing to talk. The argument, as they had come to call it, had occurred last Christmas. After dinner, with the grandchildren playing with new toys and the adults gathered in the living room, Winston and Abigail had announced their decision to use their retirement savings to fund humanitarian architectural projects in developing countries. Projects Winston would consult on, combining his expertise with local needs. They had been met with stunned silence, followed by Juniper's lawyerly interrogation about their financial security, Thackeray's medical concerns about tropical diseases at their age, and Phaedra's outright accusation that they were being reckless with their legacy. The unspoken subtext, that money their children had counted on inheriting would be spent, had hung in the air like a noxious gas, poisoning what should have been a celebration of generosity and purpose. The evening had deteriorated from there, old resentments surfacing, voices raising. The grandchildren had been hastily gathered, coats thrown on over new Christmas outfits, car doors slammed. In the year since, communication had dwindled to obligatory birthday calls and the occasional email about practical matters. They're adults with their own lives, Winston said, the practiced response they had exchanged throughout the year. They'll come around when they're ready. The doorbell interrupted their contemplation. Abigail rose quickly, hope flashing across her face before she could suppress it. But instead of family, she found a delivery person with a certified letter requiring Winston's signature. Winston opened the envelope at the kitchen table, Abigail standing beside him with one hand on his shoulder. As he read, his expression darkened, the lines around his mouth deepening. The neighborhood rezoning passed the city council, he said finally. Commercial development has been approved. Our property taxes will triple next fiscal year. Abigail sank into the chair beside him. Their comfortable retirement had already been stretched thin by medical expenses not covered by insurance. Winston's knee replacement 2 years ago, her cataract surgery. The humanitarian projects they had hoped to support had already been scaled back in their planning. A tripling of property taxes would make staying in their home impossible. We could appeal, Abigail suggested without conviction. They both knew that development interests typically prevailed in such matters. Their middle-class neighborhood of single-family homes, once desirable for its proximity to good schools, was now valuable for its proximity to the expanding business district. We could, Winston agreed, folding the letter carefully. Or we could consider that maybe it's time for a change. Before Abigail could respond, the phone rang, an unusual occurrence on Christmas Day given their now limited social circle. She answered with tentative hope. Whitaker residence, Abigail speaking. Hello, Mrs. Whitaker. This is Corinne, Ms. Phaedra Whitaker's executive assistant. Abigail's face fell, not her daughter calling, but her daughter's assistant. She pressed the speaker button so Winston could hear. Merry Christmas, Corinne, Abigail managed, with the politeness ingrained through decades of social niceties. Ms. Whitaker asked me to inform you that she will be unavailable for the traditional New Year's call this year. The fourth quarter reports have identified several critical issues requiring her immediate attention, and she'll be working through the holiday period. She sends her regrets. Winston's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. Abigail closed her eyes briefly before responding. I see. Please tell Phaedra that we understand how demanding her work is. We hope she'll find time to rest despite the busy schedule. After a few more awkward exchanges, the call ended. Abigail placed the phone carefully in its cradle, her movements deliberate, controlled. "An assistant," she said quietly. She couldn't even make the call herself. Winston's hand covered hers. "Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, Abby. Maybe it's time we stopped waiting for them to remember we exist." That evening, after a simple dinner of reheated Christmas casserole, Winston opened his laptop, a gift from Phaedra 3 Christmases ago, rarely used. Abigail, curious, watched as he navigated with careful precision to a real estate website and pulled up a saved listing she hadn't known he'd been viewing. "What's this?" she asked, peering at the screen. "A possibility," Winston replied. 5 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Has what's listed as a rustic cabin, though from the photos, that seems generous. The land is what matters. Good southern exposure, natural spring water, old-growth trees. Abigail studied the photos with increasing interest. The cabin was little more than a dilapidated structure with a partially collapsed roof, surrounded by overgrown vegetation. But beyond the immediate disrepair, she could see the mountains rising majestically, the vibrant green of diverse plant life, the promise of privacy and peace. "It's been on the market for 3 years," Winston continued. "Prices dropped 4 times. The realtor's notes say it needs total renovation or demolition. Most buyers want something turnkey, not a project." "We're not most buyers," Abigail said softly, something stirring in her that had been dormant since the argument, since the slow abandonment by their children. "What would we do with such a place?" "Whatever we want," Winston replied, a spark entering his eyes. "Build something new. Grow things. Live on our terms for whatever time we have left." The idea was simultaneously frightening and exhilarating. Abigail thought of her childhood on her grandparents' farm in Virginia, the knowledge of plants and growing things she had set aside for suburban life. She thought of Winston's workshop in the garage, where he still created beautiful things from wood despite his arthritis. His lifetime of architectural expertise now used only for occasional birdhouses and toys for grandchildren who rarely visited. "Could we afford it?" she asked practically. "If we sell this house, even with the rezoning uncertainty, we'd have more than enough. The property taxes there would be a fraction of what we're facing here." They stayed up late into the night, something they rarely did anymore, exploring the possibility of this dramatic change. By the time they went to bed, a seed had been planted that would grow faster and stronger than either anticipated. 4 months later, as early spring brought the first tentative green to the mountains, Abigail and Winston stood beside realtor Meredith Holcomb at the end of a rutted dirt road, surveying their purchase. The reality was even more daunting than the listing photos had suggested. The cabin's roof had collapsed completely on one side. The porch listed dangerously. The clearing around the structure had been reclaimed by wilderness, though Abigail's experienced eye could detect the ghosts of intentional plantings beneath the wild overgrowth. Meredith shifted uncomfortably, keys dangling from her hand. "As I mentioned during the closing, most buyers in your, demographic are looking for retirement communities with amenities. I assumed you were purchasing for the land value only." She gestured vaguely toward the dilapidated structure. "This would require significant investment to make habitable." Winston took the keys from her with a nod of thanks. "We understand what we've purchased, Ms. Holcomb, and what it requires." As the realtor's car disappeared down the rough track, Winston and Abigail stood in silence, absorbing the enormity of what they had done. Their comfortable suburban home was sold, most of their possessions either sold or in storage. Their children had reacted with disbelief and concern bordering on anger when informed of their decision. Thackeray suggesting cognitive testing, Juniper investigating if they could legally block the sale, Phaedra simply demanding, "Have you both lost your minds?" Yet standing here among the ruins of what would become their new home, breathing air scented with pine and wildflowers, listening to the natural symphony of birds and rustling leaves, both felt a stirring of something they had nearly forgotten: possibility. "Where do we even begin?" Abigail wondered aloud, surveying the overwhelming task before them. Winston slipped his hand into hers, his palm calloused from a lifetime of creating and building. "One step at a time, Abby. First, we make a safe place to sleep while we work. Then we secure the structure before the next rain. Everything else follows from there." The next day found them at Finch's Hardware in the nearest town, loading basic supplies into their aging sedan. Brockton Finch, the store's owner, watched with poorly disguised amusement as they selected tools, tarps, and building materials. "You folks sure you know what you're getting into?" he asked as he rang up their purchases. "That old Keller place has been empty for 20 years. Last 3 people who bought it never even stayed a full season." "We're aware of the challenges," Winston replied evenly. Brockton chuckled, shaking his head. "No offense meant, but city people like yourselves, at your age, I'd give it a month before you're heading back to whatever suburban paradise you came from." Abigail, normally the more diplomatic of the pair, fixed the hardware store owner with a steady gaze. "We'll be seeing quite a lot of each other then, Mr. Finch. We'll need supplies regularly as we progress." If the storekeeper was surprised by her quiet determination, he didn't show it, merely continuing to ring up their items with the same amused expression. That night, they set up their tent near the cabin, using tarps to create additional protected space for supplies. The temperature dropped sharply after sunset, the spring mountain air crisp and challenging. Despite thermal sleeping bags and layers of clothing, they felt every bit of their age as they lay on the unyielding ground, listening to the unfamiliar chorus of night creatures. "Second thoughts?" Winston asked in the darkness, hearing Abigail shift uncomfortably beside him. "Not second thoughts," she replied after a moment. "Just wondering if we should have started this adventure a decade ago when our backs were stronger." Winston's laughter rumbled in the small space. "Better late than never." As if nature herself wished to test their resolve, clouds gathered during the night. They awoke to the sound of rain pattering against the tent, growing steadily heavier. By midday, the dirt road to their property had turned to mud, and water dripped through the damaged cabin roof in dozens of places, creating small pools on the warped wooden floor. They worked regardless, Winston assessing the structural integrity of the cabin, while Abigail began the painstaking process of documenting the property, mapping the terrain, identifying existing plants beneath the overgrowth, noting where the sun fell most strongly at different times of day. By late afternoon, the rain had become a genuine downpour. Water seeped under the edge of their tent, despite the trenches Winston had dug around it. They huddled inside, damp and chilled, eating sandwiches made that morning while listening to the storm's fury. Abigail's phone rang, one of the few modern conveniences they had maintained, though service was spotty in the mountains. Phaedra's name appeared on the screen, the first. Direct contact from any of their children since they had announced their move. "Phaedra," Abigail answered, trying to keep the hopeful note from her voice. "How lovely to hear from you." "Mom, where exactly are you right now?" Her daughter's voice was tense, clipped in the way it became when she was managing what she considered a crisis. "In our tent, on our new property. It's raining quite heavily at the moment." A sound of exasperation came through the line. "You sold a perfectly good house to live in a tent, in the mountains, at your age." "The tent is temporary while we work on the cabin," Abigail explained, though she knew the distinction would matter little to her daughter. "It's quite cozy, actually." "This is madness," Phaedra declared. "You sold the house? For what? A death trap in the wilderness? Is this some kind of elderly rebellion because we've been busy with our own lives?" Winston, hearing the rising tension in his daughter's voice, gently took the phone from Abigail. "Phaedra, we're fine. The property has enormous potential, and we're enjoying the project." "Enjoying," Phaedra repeated incredulously. "Dad, you had knee replacement surgery 2 years ago. Mom isn't exactly in peak physical condition either. What happens when one of you falls or gets hurt out there in the middle of nowhere?" "The same thing that would happen in the suburbs," Winston replied calmly. "We'd call for help if needed. The nearest town is only 20 minutes away." The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes before ending with Phaedra's frustrated promise to figure something out about their situation, as if it were a problem to be solved rather than a choice to be respected. As the rain intensified, water began to seep more insistently into their tent. Winston placed containers to catch the worst leaks, while Abigail rearranged their sleeping bags to avoid the dampest areas. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the trees and threatening the stability of their temporary shelter. In the dim light of their battery-powered lantern, they looked at each other, 2 people in their 70s, soaking wet, sitting on damp sleeping bags in a leaking tent, miles from the nearest neighbor having left behind comfort and convenience and the familiar patterns of 5 decades. Winston reached for Abigail's hand across the small space. "We built a life once," he said softly. "We can build another." Abigail's fingers tightened around his, the wedding band she had worn for over 50 years, catching the lantern light. "Yes," she agreed, "we can." Outside, unseen in the storm's darkness, the first tiny sprouts of what would become their garden were already pushing through the soil, responding to Abigail's careful preparation of days before. Seeds planted, taking hold, beginning to grow. 6 months into their mountain adventure, Abigail stood in what had once been a barren clearing, surveying the progress with tired satisfaction. The early autumn sun cast long shadows across their property, highlighting how much had changed since that rainy spring day when they'd huddled in a leaking tent. The cabin, while still far from complete, now had a solid roof and weather-tight walls. Winston had approached the repairs methodically, beginning with structural stabilization before tackling the collapsed section. Their tent had been replaced by a small but sturdy sleeping area inside the partially renovated structure, providing basic shelter that improved with each passing week. Abigail's domain, the land surrounding the cabin, showed even more dramatic transformation. Neat rows of late-season vegetables thrived in raised beds constructed from stones cleared from the property. A small greenhouse frame stood ready for the approaching winter, built from salvage windows Winston had discovered at a demolition site in town. Around the perimeter of the clearing, Abigail had identified and nurtured native plants with medicinal or practical value, marking them with small hand-painted signs. She winced slightly as she straightened, her back protesting the morning spent weeding and harvesting. At 72, her body reminded her daily of its limitations, yet she found herself stronger than she had been in years. The physical labor that had initially seemed overwhelming had gradually reshaped her. Tanned hands now bore calluses alongside her carefully maintained wedding ring, and muscles long dormant had reawakened through necessity. The sound of hammering from the cabin's eastern side signaled Winston's location. Despite his arthritis, which flared painfully on damp days, he worked steadily from sunrise until his strength gave out in late afternoon. His methodical approach revealed knowledge that surprised even Abigail, who had been married to him for over 5 decades. The precision with which he calculated load-bearing requirements, the careful consideration of light patterns when positioning windows, the ingenious solutions to problems that would have defeated less experienced builders, all pointed to expertise beyond that of a hobbyist. "Lunch is ready when you are," she called, knowing he would work through the meal if not reminded. Winston appeared around the corner of the cabin, wiping his hands on a cloth tucked into his belt. At 75, he moved more slowly than in his younger years, but with the same deliberate purpose that had always characterized him. His once soft hands had rekindled their calluses, and his skin had weathered to a healthy tan beneath his now regular straw hat. "All ready?" he asked, glancing at the position of the sun. "Lost track of time fixing that east wall. The previous owner used non-standard framing that's causing settling issues." They sat together on the porch Winston had rebuilt first, a strategic decision to create a comfortable outdoor living space while the interior remained under construction. Abigail served a simple meal of garden, vegetables, fresh bread from their weekly trip to town, and preserved fish from Brockton Finch's brother's store. "The tomatoes are exceptional this year," Winston commented, savoring the bright red fruit that bore little resemblance to the pale, flavorless varieties they had purchased in suburban supermarkets. "The soil here is remarkable once you get through the top layer of pine needles," Abigail replied. "I've been adding the compost we started in spring, and the difference is noticeable." Their conversation flowed easily between practical matters of construction and gardening to observations about wildlife and weather patterns. Absent was any mention of their children or grandchildren, a topic that had become increasingly painful as months passed without meaningful contact. The distant sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted their meal, an unusual occurrence given their remote location. They exchanged curious glances, setting aside their plates to walk to the edge of the clearing where they could see the rutted access road. A mud-splattered pickup truck navigated the final turn, coming into view with 2 teenagers visible in the cab. The vehicle stopped at the edge of the cleared area, and the occupants emerged cautiously. A lanky boy of perhaps 16 and a girl who appeared slightly younger, both regarding the elderly couple with poorly disguised curiosity. "Afternoon," the boy called, attempting to sound more confident than he appeared. Mr. Finch at the hardware store said there were some city folks fixing up the old Keller place. Said you might need help hauling supplies or clearing land. Winston approached them with an easy smile. We can always use an extra set of hands. I'm Winston Whitaker, and this is my wife, Abigail. Rowan Mackenzie, the boy replied. This is my sister Larkin. Our grandmother lives about 3 miles down the mountain. While their initial offer of assistance might have been genuine, Abigail suspected from their barely concealed smirks that curiosity about the old city folks was their primary motivation. Local teenagers looking for entertainment by observing what many in town still considered a doomed project. We're about to continue work on the east wall supports, Winston said, as if their help had been expected all along. Rowan, if you're strong enough to hold a crossbeam while I secure it, that would save considerable time. The casual challenge to the boy's strength worked exactly as intended. Rowan straightened his posture and nodded. Yes, sir. I help my uncle with barn repairs all the time. Winston led him toward the cabin while Larkin remained, shifting awkwardly under Abigail's gaze. I should probably help them, the girl said, though she made no move to follow. Actually, Abigail replied, I could use assistance sorting this morning's harvest for storage, unless you'd prefer construction work. Larkin glanced toward the cabin, then shook her head. No, ma'am, I'm not much for hammers and nails. Abigail guided her to the garden area, where baskets of freshly harvested vegetables awaited processing. As they worked, Abigail demonstrated how to identify which items would store well and which needed immediate use or preservation. What's this one for? Larkin asked, pointing to a smaller garden bed containing plants distinctly different from the vegetables. Medicinal herbs, Abigail explained. That one there is jewelweed, excellent for treating poison ivy. Speaking of which, she added, noticing the girl absently scratching her forearm, it looks like you might have encountered some recently. Larkin examined the red, irritated skin on her arm. Got it 3 days ago. Mom's been putting that pink stuff from the pharmacy on it, but it's not helping much. May I? Abigail asked, indicating the affected area. After receiving a nod, she gently examined the rash. Classic poison ivy. I'll make you something that should help more than commercial preparations. With the girl watching attentively, Abigail harvested some jewelweed stems, extracted the clear liquid inside, and combined it with several other ingredients from her organized supply shelf. The resulting salve she applied carefully to Larkin's irritated skin. It already feels cooler, the teenager said with surprise. Where'd you learn to do this? My grandmother taught me when I was about your age, Abigail replied, sealing the remaining salve in a small container, which she handed to Larkin. Apply this morning and night. The rash should be significantly improved by tomorrow. From the cabin, the sounds of Rowan and Winston working together drifted across the clearing. The boy's voice animated as Winston apparently explained something about proper beam placement. By late afternoon, when the teenagers prepared to leave, their initial skepticism had transformed into genuine interest. Rowan proudly explained to his sister how he had helped secure critical support beams, while Larkin displayed the salve and small bundle of fresh vegetables Abigail had given her. Can we come back tomorrow? Rowan asked, surprising both Whitakers. Mr. Winston said he could show me how to properly frame a window. You're welcome any time, Winston replied. We could use the help, and I'm happy to teach what I know. As the pickup disappeared down the mountain road, Abigail and Winston exchanged quiet smiles. More than the practical assistance, the young people had brought energy and connection that both realized they had deeply missed. They'll be back, Winston predicted. The boy has a natural aptitude for structural work, asked intelligent questions. And Larkin has a healer's hands, Abigail added. She took to the plan identification immediately. The next day brought not only the return of Rowan and Larkin, but the arrival of Brockton Finch himself, driving his store's delivery truck up the rutted road. The hardware store owner had never personally delivered their orders before, always sending one of his employees while he remained in town. Figured I'd see how you're using all those supplies, he explained gruffly, helping Winston unload lumber from the truck bed. Make sure you're not wasting good materials. The real reason for his visit became clear as he surveyed their progress, poorly concealing his surprise at the professional quality of the work. Expected a ramshackle repair job, he admitted finally. This is proper restoration work. Where'd you learn these techniques? Winston, focused on checking a load-bearing beam, answered without looking up. Spent 40 years in architectural restoration before retiring, specialized in historical structures and challenging renovations. Brockton's demeanor shifted subtly, his earlier condescension replaced by growing professional respect as Winston explained the specialized approach he was taking to preserve the cabin's original character while improving its functionality. Most folks would have bulldozed this place and started fresh, Brockton commented, or tried quick fixes that wouldn't last a season. Some things are worth restoring properly, Winston replied, the simple statement carrying deeper meaning than just cabin renovation. Before leaving, Brockton made notes about additional supplies they would need, offering unprompted advice about local resources and potential salvage opportunities from upcoming demolition projects in the county. As autumn progressed toward winter, the Whitakers' isolation gradually diminished. Word spread through the close-knit mountain community about the elderly couple transforming the abandoned Keller property. Rowan and Larkin became regular visitors, often bringing friends curious to see the project. Local knowledge began flowing their way. Warnings about weather patterns specific to their mountain slope, gifts of regional plant cuttings suited to their soil conditions, invitations to community gatherings. The physical toll of their work became increasingly evident as winter approached. Winston's arthritis flared painfully during cold snaps, forcing him to modify tools to accommodate his grip on bad days. Abigail developed a persistent cough from clearing decades of dust from the cabin's interior, yet neither complained nor suggested abandoning their project, even as the first snow dusted the mountaintop. Their Christmas that year bore little resemblance to the elaborate celebrations of their suburban life. The partially finished cabin was decorated with pine boughs and handcrafted ornaments made from materials found on their property. Gifts were practical items needed for continued work: new gloves, specialized tools, seeds for spring planting. Most striking was the absence of communication from their children. Winston had sent photographs of their progress to all three, along with brief updates about their mountain life. No responses came, no holiday calls, no acknowledgement of their continued existence. On Christmas evening, Abigail found Winston sitting alone in what would eventually become their proper living room, staring at the wood stove they had installed for winter heating. In his hands was a small wooden toy, a pull-along duck he had crafted for one of their grandchildren years earlier. "We're building something they may never see," he said quietly as Abigail settled beside him. The pain in his voice had nothing to do with physical discomfort and everything to do with the empty space where family should have been. Abigail leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Then we're building it for ourselves, and perhaps for others who might appreciate it more." As winter gradually yielded to spring, the one-year anniversary of their arrival approached. The transformation of both property and people had progressed beyond what either had imagined possible. The cabin, while still requiring significant work, now featured a fully functional kitchen, proper bedroom, and comfortable living area. The preliminary garden beds had expanded into a comprehensive growing system designed to provide year-round sustenance. Most remarkable was the greenhouse Winston had completed just before the worst winter weather, a beautiful structure of salvage windows and local stone that captured the southern sunlight, allowing Abigail to grow vegetables and medicinal plants throughout the coldest months. Its elegant design had attracted attention from neighbors who traveled specifically to see the glass house on the mountain, as it had become known locally. The mail carrier, Zephyr Quinn, had become a regular visitor, often lingering to chat after delivering their infrequent mail. A woman in her 30s with an interest in sustainable living, she peppered Abigail with questions about the traditional food preservation techniques she employed. "My grandmother used to can vegetables like this," Zephyr commented one spring morning, examining Abigail's organized pantry shelves. "I always wanted to learn, but she passed before she could teach me." "I'd be happy to show you," Abigail offered. "We'll have plenty to preserve once the summer harvest begins." The casual offer evolved into regular teaching sessions as word spread about Mrs. Whitaker's preservation classes. Women from surrounding properties began visiting, bringing their own garden surplus to learn traditional methods of canning, drying, and root cellaring. Meanwhile, Winston had established a workshop in a small outbuilding they had reconstructed. Using timber from trees cleared from their land and salvage materials from various sources, he began crafting furniture for their home, simple but beautifully designed pieces that reflected both functionality and artistry. Rowan, now a regular apprentice, marveled at Winston's ability to see potential in materials others would discard. "You could sell these in town for good money," he suggested one afternoon while helping sand a hand-carved chair. "People pay premium for handmade stuff like this." Winston considered the idea thoughtfully. Their financial situation, while not desperate, would eventually require additional income beyond their modest retirement funds. The property renovation had consumed much of their savings, and ongoing needs would continue to arise. News of their transformation had spread beyond their immediate community. Linnea Esposito, a reporter from the regional newspaper, arrived unannounced one April morning as Abigail was transplanting seedlings to the outdoor beds. "I've been hearing stories about the mountain miracle couple for months," Linnea explained, notebook in hand. "Thought it might make a good human interest piece for our weekend edition." Initially reluctant, the Whitakers gradually warmed to her genuine interest in their project. As Linnea toured the property, her questions evolved from general curiosity to more specific inquiries about techniques and design choices. "This greenhouse design is remarkable," she commented, examining the structure's clever water collection system. "It's similar to sustainable architecture I've seen in professional journals." Winston nodded. "The principles are the same: passive solar gain, thermal mass for heat retention, strategic ventilation, simple physics applied thoughtfully." "And these plant combinations?" Linnea continued, studying Abigail's garden layout. "They're not random, are they? This looks like professional companion planting design." "Different plants support each other when properly arranged," Abigail explained. "Some deter pests that would damage their neighbors, others enhance soil nutrients. It's knowledge that used to be common among those who grew their own food." As the interview progressed, Linnea's expression shifted from journalistic interest to genuine respect. "You're not just retired folks with a hobby project, are you?" she asked finally. "This is expert-level work in both construction and agriculture." Winston and Abigail exchanged glances, a silent communication honed through decades together. It was time for the fuller truth to emerge. "I was an architectural restoration specialist for 40 years, Winston acknowledged. "Worked on everything from historical landmarks to international preservation projects. Taught at the university level before focusing on practical application. And I have a background in botany," Abigail added. "Left formal research when our children were born, but never abandoned my interest or continued education in the field." Linnea's professional demeanor momentarily faltered. "But why not lead with those credentials? Why let everyone believe you were just stubborn city retirees taking on an impossible project?" "Sometimes it's better to prove your competence through results rather than resume," Winston replied simply. "Actions speak more convincingly than credentials." That evening, after Linnea had departed with pages of notes and numerous photographs, Abigail and Winston sat on their completed porch, watching spring twilight settle over their transformed property. The conversation with the reporter had unearthed memories and identities long submerged beneath the roles of parents, suburban homeowners, and now mountain pioneers. "It felt strange to speak of my research again after so many years," Abigail admitted. "I'd almost forgotten that part of myself." Winston nodded, understanding perfectly. "We became so focused on raising the children, building conventional success, fitting the expected pattern. Somewhere along the way we set aside the passions that originally defined us." A comfortable silence fell between them as night creatures began their symphony around the clearing. In 1 year, they had accomplished what many considered impossible, transforming both a dilapidated property and themselves in the process. Yet the absence of family to share in their achievement left a hollow space that new friends and community connections couldn't entirely fill. "Do you think the children will ever understand what we're doing here?" Abigail asked, the question she had carefully avoided for months finally finding voice. Winston considered this thoughtfully before answering. "I don't know, Abby. I hope someday they will, but I'm increasingly convinced that we needed to do this regardless of their understanding, perhaps especially because of their absence." She reached for his hand in the gathering darkness, the gesture containing 5 decades of shared struggle and joy. "Then we continue building, for ourselves and whoever else might eventually appreciate what we've created." "We continue," Winston agreed, squeezing her fingers gently. "One stone, one plant, one day at a time." The morning dew still clung to the garden paths as Zephyr Quinn's mail truck navigated the now smooth gravel road leading to the Whitakers' mountain home. 2 years had transformed the rutted track into a proper driveway, lined with flowering native shrubs that Abigail had carefully transplanted and nurtured. The mail carrier slowed, as she always did now, to appreciate the view that unfolded with each visit. Where once stood a collapsing cabin surrounded by wilderness, a harmonious homestead had emerged that seemed to have grown from the mountain itself. The restored cabin had doubled in size through thoughtful additions that respected the original structure while enhancing its functionality. A wide, covered porch wrapped around 3 sides, furnished with Winston's handcrafted rocking chairs and tables. Stone pathways connected various outbuildings. The expanded greenhouse, Winston's workshop, a root cellar built into the hillside, and most recently, a small guest cabin near the edge of the woods. The gardens had transformed even more dramatically. Concentric circles of plantings surrounded the main house, designed not just for productivity, but for beauty, with careful attention to color, texture, and seasonal interest. Trellises covered with flowering vines created living walls. Fruit trees, still young but already bearing, marked the transition between cultivated space and the wilder forest beyond. A small stream that Winston had diverted from the natural spring now wound through the landscape, feeding irrigation channels and culminating in a reflection pool near the eastern garden. Zephyr parked near the workshop and gathered the day's mail, including several packages and what appeared to be a newspaper. As she approached the main house, she found Abigail kneeling in the herb garden, her 74-year-old hands moving with practiced efficiency as she harvested fresh mint and lemon balm. "Morning, Mrs. Whitaker," Zephyr called. "Quite a bit of mail today, including something that looks like a newspaper." Abigail looked up, shading her eyes against the morning sun. 2 years of mountain living had weathered her skin, but also lent her a vitality that belied her age. Her once carefully styled hair was now most often braided simply down her back, streaked liberally with silver that caught the light. "Thank you, Zephyr. Would you mind bringing it to the porch? I've just made fresh tea." The mail carrier needed no second invitation. These brief visits had become a highlight of her rural route. She settled into one of Winston's perfectly balanced rocking chairs, while Abigail washed her hands at the outdoor pump Winston had installed beside the kitchen garden. "Winston's down at the veterans' workshop this morning," Abigail explained, as she served tea in hand-thrown mugs made by a local potter. "They're finishing the community center tables for the summer festival." Zephyr nodded, sipping the fragrant tea appreciatively. "The whole town's talking about those tables. Sergeant Rafferty says they're the finest craftsmanship he's seen since his grandfather's day." The veterans' workshop, as it had come to be known, had begun almost accidentally. 6 months earlier, Winston had encountered a group of former military members from the VA Rehabilitation Center in the next county over. They had been on a therapeutic outing, and their van had broken down near the Whitakers' property. While waiting for repairs, Winston had shown them his workshop, and an immediate connection had formed. Now, twice weekly, Winston provided woodworking instruction to veterans finding their way back to civilian life through the meditative practice of craftsmanship. Abigail sorted through the mail, pausing at the newspaper Zephyr had mentioned. It wasn't their regular local paper, but the weekend edition of the Regional Gazette, folded open to a specific page. Her eyes widened as she took in the headline, "Mountain Miracle, Abandoned Property Transformed into Living Paradise." Below the headline stretched a full-color photograph of their property taken from the hillside above, capturing the harmonious layout of buildings and gardens, the stone pathways, the greenhouse reflecting morning light. Smaller inset photos showed Winston teaching a woodworking technique to local teenagers, Abigail conducting one of her herb walks with community members, and a detailed shot of the intricate stonework Winston had completed on the main house's foundation. Linnea's article, Abigail breathed, scanning the byline that confirmed Linnea Esposito as the author. "She said it would run sometime this month, but I'd almost forgotten." "It's been the talk of 3 counties since yesterday," Zephyr informed her. "People coming into the post office asking how to find that mountain paradise place. Mr. Finch at the hardware store has a stack of them by his register." Abigail read quickly, struck by the respectful tone and accurate reporting. Linnea had captured not just the physical transformation, but the deeper story as well. how two people considered past their prime had created something remarkable through knowledge, persistence, and vision. The article made specific mention of Winston's background in architectural restoration and Abigail's botanical expertise, noting how these professional skills, temporarily set aside during their suburban life, had found full expression in their mountain creation. Most touching was the community impact section, where local residents, including a quoted Brockton Finch, spoke about how the Whitakers had revitalized traditional knowledge in the area, teaching sustainable building techniques and nearly forgotten plant lore to younger generations. "It's a lovely article," Abigail said finally, folding the paper carefully. "Linnea captured the spirit of what we've tried to create here." "Will you send it to your children?" Zephyr asked, then immediately looked apologetic. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." Abigail's smile held a touch of sadness. "It's a fair question. Perhaps I will, though I doubt it would change much at this point." The estrangement from their children remained a quiet wound that neither Abigail nor Winston discussed often. In 2 years, communication had dwindled to perfunctory birthday emails and occasional secondhand news through mutual acquaintances. None of their children had visited, despite standing invitations. After Zephyr continued on her route, Abigail spent the morning on her usual tasks, harvesting, preserving, tending the beehives they had established the previous spring. The newspaper lay on the kitchen table, a tangible validation of what they had accomplished. Yet the absence of family to share in that accomplishment cast a shadow over her satisfaction. Early afternoon brought the sound of Winston's truck returning from town, accompanied by another vehicle. Abigail stepped onto the porch, curious about the unexpected visitor, and felt her heart stutter in her chest. Behind Winston's familiar pickup followed a sleek black SUV she recognized immediately, Thackeray's vehicle, the one he purchased new every 2 years as a symbol of his surgical practice's success. Winston parked and emerged from his truck, his expression a complex mixture of surprise and cautious hope. From the SUV stepped not just Thackeray, but Juniper and Phaedra as well, all 3 of their children together, an occurrence so rare in recent years that Abigail couldn't remember the last time it had happened. Most shocking was the presence of several grandchildren: Thackeray's teenage son, Cameron, Juniper's twin daughters, and Phaedra's young son. They emerged from the vehicles tentatively, looking around with expressions ranging from skepticism to undisguised wonder. "Mom," Thackeray said, approaching the porch with uncharacteristic hesitancy. At 50, their eldest showed the first touches of gray at his temples, his surgeon's bearing slightly stiffer than she remembered. "The newspaper article. It's everywhere online. Someone at the hospital shared it, and then Juniper called, and we realized we needed to see for ourselves." Abigail stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of the family she had missed desperately, yet learned to live without. Winston moved to her side, his solid presence anchoring her as always. "You're all welcome," Winston said simply. "Would you like a tour of what we've built?" The next hour unfolded in a dreamlike state for Abigail. She watched her children's expressions transform as Winston led them through the property, explaining the restoration techniques, the sustainable systems, the careful integration of built and natural environments. Professional respect gradually replaced the condescension and concern that had characterized their last interactions. "The structural reinforcement is ingenious," Juniper admitted, examining the cabin's expanded living area. "I had no idea you knew how to do all this, Dad." "He doesn't just know how," came a new voice as Sergeant Rafferty approached from the direction of the workshop. "He's been teaching these techniques to half the county. My men from the VA program have learned more from Mr. Whitaker in 6 months than they would in years of conventional training." The children turned in surprise as several community members arrived, Brockton Finch with a basket of fresh fish, Rowan and Larkin bringing handcrafted gifts, neighbors with dishes for an impromptu gathering. Word had spread quickly about the Whitakers' unexpected family reunion. "You've become quite important to this community," Phaedra observed quietly to her mother as they stood watching Winston show his grandson Cameron how to use a hand plane in the workshop. "The article mentioned your medicinal plant program. Is that really supplying the local clinic?" Abigail nodded. "Dr. Ellsworth integrates traditional remedies with conventional medicine. Many of the older residents prefer it, and the results have been promising enough that she's documenting outcomes for a medical journal." The grandchildren, initially uncertain in this, unfamiliar environment, had quickly discovered the joys of mountain freedom. Cameron followed Winston like a shadow, clearly fascinated by his grandfather's workshop. Juniper's twins explored the gardens with Rowan's younger siblings, while Phaedra's son had found the small treehouse Winston had built, primarily for the neighbor children who visited regularly. As sunset approached, the gathering moved to the large outdoor dining area Winston had constructed near the outdoor kitchen. Lanterns illuminated tables laden with food, most of it grown on the property or contributed by neighbors. The atmosphere held a festival quality, with children playing tag between the tables and adults engaged in animated conversation. Abigail found herself seated beside Thackeray, watching as Winston demonstrated a wood-joining technique to Cameron across the lawn. "He's good with Cameron," Thackeray observed. "I didn't realize Dad had those teaching skills." "He taught architectural restoration at the university for 12 years, Abigail replied, "before focusing on field work. Surely you remember. He used to bring home models to show you children." Thackeray's expression revealed that he had not, in fact, remembered this aspect of his father's professional life. "I guess I always just thought of him as Dad, not as someone with specialized expertise. We became our roles as parents so completely that perhaps we made it too easy for you to forget we were anything else," Abigail suggested gently. As the evening progressed, Brockton Finch stood to make an impromptu toast. "When these two city folks showed up with their fancy car and clean hands, I gave them a month before they'd be heading back to suburban comfort." The hardware store owner's voice carried across the gathering. "I've never been happier to be wrong. What they've built here isn't just a home, it's a revival of knowledge we were losing, techniques and traditions that deserve to continue." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled neighbors. Abigail noticed her children's surprised expressions as they witnessed the genuine respect accorded their parents by the community. "To the Whitakers," Brockton concluded, raising his glass, "who taught this old mountain some new tricks and reminded us of some old ones worth remembering." Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Juniper approached her parents on the porch. "We've taken rooms at the inn in town," she said, "but we'd like to come back tomorrow, if that's all right. There's more to see, and the girls are desperate to learn about the beekeeping they glimpsed." "Of course," Winston replied, the casual tone belying the emotion Abigail could hear beneath his words. "You're always welcome, all of you." After the last visitor departed and the family had gone to their lodgings in town, Abigail and Winston sat on their porch in the familiar rocking chairs, the night sounds of their mountain home surrounding them like a well-known melody. "They seemed genuinely impressed," Abigail said finally, breaking their contemplative silence. "They were seeing us clearly perhaps for the first time in decades," Winston replied. "Not as just parents or grandparents, but as people with knowledge and capabilities independent of our relationship to them." "Do you think this changes things for our relationship with them?" Winston considered this carefully. "I hope so. But even if it doesn't, what we've built here matters. It has value beyond our family's recognition." The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, as if nature herself wanted to showcase their creation in its best light. The family returned early, the grandchildren barely waiting for their parents to park before tumbling out to resume explorations interrupted by the previous night's departure. Juniper found Abigail in the herb garden, carefully harvesting lavender for drying. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "I owe you an apology. We all do." Abigail continued her harvesting, allowing her daughter the space to continue. "When you sold the house and bought this place, we thought you were having some kind of elderly crisis. We were concerned, yes, but we were also angry. The inheritance we expected was being spent on what we thought was a foolish whim." "And now?" Abigail asked, meeting her daughter's eyes directly. "Now I see that you and Dad are more capable than we ever gave you credit for. What you've created here isn't just impressive, it's important. The work Dad is doing with the veterans, your medicinal plant program, the sustainability systems you've established, they matter." Across the property, similar conversations were taking place. Thackeray and Winston stood in the workshop, discussing the fine details of a table under construction. Phaedra had joined several local residents for Abigail's weekly plant walk, taking detailed notes as her mother identified medicinal species and explained their proper uses. By midday, the local government representative had arrived, having heard about the Whitakers' visitors. Mrs. Harbridge, a formidable woman in her 60s who served as county commissioner, had been instrumental in helping the couple navigate permit requirements for their unconventional property development. "I hope you don't mind my dropping by," she said, accepting tea on the porch. "But I wanted your family to know that next month's council meeting will formally recognize this property as a living heritage site. The documentation of traditional building techniques and botanical knowledge happening here has significant cultural value for our region." Juniper, the attorney, immediately grasped the implications. "That designation carries tax benefits and preservation protections, doesn't it?" "Indeed," Mrs. Harbridge confirmed. "It ensures that what your parents have created here will continue as an educational and cultural resource regardless of future ownership." That evening, as they prepared for their final dinner together before the family returned to their respective homes, Phaedra approached her parents with her laptop open. "I've been thinking about how to support what you're doing here," she said. "I've created a basic framework for an online platform to share the knowledge and techniques you're preserving. A digital extension of the physical work." Winston examined the prototype she displayed, nodding appreciatively at the thoughtful organization. "This could reach people far beyond those who can visit in person." "That's the idea," Phaedra agreed. "And I'd like to come back monthly to document more of your methods, with your permission, of course." As they gathered for dinner on the porch that had become the heart of the property, Abigail looked around at her assembled family. Children and grandchildren engaged in animated conversation, passing dishes of food grown from their land, asking questions about the processes and principles that had shaped their mountain home. "We thought you needed us to survive," Phaedra admitted during a lull in conversation. "You were showing us how to truly live." The following day brought reluctant departures as the family prepared to return to their respective homes. But the conversations had shifted fundamentally from their previous interactions. "Cameron would like to spend 2 weeks here this summer," Thackeray said as they loaded their vehicles. "If that's acceptable to you. He's shown more interest in Dad's woodworking in one weekend than in anything I've tried to teach him in years. I'm relocating my practice part-time to Riverton," he added, naming the nearest sizable town. "They need surgical coverage at the regional medical center, and it would allow more regular visits." Juniper had already begun paperwork to establish a legal framework for the property's future. "The Living Heritage designation is just the beginning," she explained. "We can create an educational trust to ensure this place continues its mission beyond your immediate stewardship." Even Phaedra, the most career-focused of their children, had found a way to connect her technology expertise to her parents' work. "The online platform will be ready for testing within a month. I'd like to bring a videographer next visit to document some of the techniques properly." As the last vehicle disappeared down the mountain road, Abigail and Winston returned to their porch, the space suddenly quiet after the whirlwind of family activity. "It will never be the same as before," Winston observed, "but perhaps it can be something new, something better." Abigail nodded, watching a hummingbird visit the flowering vines they had trained along the porch railing. "They see us now, not just as parents or grandparents, but as people with knowledge worth preserving and sharing." 1 year later, the Whitakers' mountain home hummed with activity even on ordinary days. The guest cabins Winston had built now regularly housed visiting grandchildren, especially during school breaks. Thackeray had indeed established his part-time practice in Riverton, spending every other weekend at the mountain property with his family. Juniper's legal work had created a formal educational foundation around the Whitakers' knowledge, securing grants to support expanded programming. Phaedra's online platform had attracted international attention, leading to visiting scholars interested in documenting the traditional practices being preserved. On a perfect summer afternoon, the property hosted its first official festival as a living heritage site. Tables Winston had crafted with his veterans group stretched across the central gathering space, laden with food prepared largely from the expanded community gardens. Local musicians played traditional mountain tunes, while children chased each other through the winding paths Abigail had designed. Winston found a quiet moment with Cameron, now showing remarkable woodworking talent under his grandfather's tutelage. "What do you think of all this?" he asked, gesturing toward the gathered community. "Not quite the boring retirement your parents worried about, is it?" The teenager grinned. "It's incredible. My friends think it's crazy that my grandparents created all this from nothing." "Not from nothing," Winston corrected gently. from knowledge and care and persistence. Nothing worthwhile ever comes from nothing. Across the gathering, Abigail sat with her youngest grandchild, Phaedra's son, helping him plant seedlings in a small plot designated as the children's garden. His small hands pressed the soil carefully around a tomato start as Abigail guided him. "Am I doing it right, Grandma?" he asked earnestly. "Perfectly," she assured him. "Gardens don't care how old the hands are that tend them, only that they're tended with love." As evening approached, Winston and Abigail found themselves momentarily alone on their porch, watching the celebration continue across their property. What had begun in abandonment and pain had flowered into something neither could have imagined that rainy night in their leaking tent. "They thought we were running away to die," Winston reflected, his hand finding Abigail's as it had countless times through their decades together. "We were really coming here to remember how to live." Abigail squeezed his fingers, the gesture containing a lifetime of shared struggles and triumphs. Below them, 3 generations now moved through the gardens and structures they had created from a broken, forgotten place that no one else had valued. "Look what grew from our heartbreak," she said softly. "A whole world rebuilt, stone by stone.